The sound of a rifle cracked through the crisp morning air as Lucy Collins dropped to one knee, her breath forming small clouds in the cold dawn. She wasn't hunting game, she was buying time. Debt had a way of making people desperate, and Lucy had never been more desperate than now, kneeling in the frost-covered grass of Blackwater Ranch with the weight of her father's mistakes pressing down on her shoulders like the heavy wool coat she wore. The year was 1878, and Republic, Washington Territory, was still a rough-hewn settlement carved from wilderness, where fortunes were made and lost on the turn of a card or the discovery of a silver vein. Lucy had grown up here, watching the town evolve from a scattering of tents to a proper settlement with a main street, a general store, and even a small church. Her father, James Collins, had been one of the first to stake a claim in the area, building a modest homestead where they'd lived happily, until consumption took her mother 5 years ago. Lucy sighted down the barrel of the rifle again, aiming at the row of bottles she'd set up along the fence post. One by one, they shattered with satisfying pops. Target practice had become her morning ritual, one of the few pleasures she allowed herself since starting work at Blackwater Ranch 6 months ago. "Not bad shooting for a woman," a deep voice commented from behind her. Lucy didn't turn. She recognized the voice of Emmett Blackwater, owner of the largest cattle operation in the county and now her employer and debt holder. "I reckon I shoot better than most of your cowboys, Mr. Blackwater." "Maybe so," he conceded, moving to stand beside her. He was a tall man in his 40s, with graying temples and eyes that had grown hard from years of fighting the land, the weather, and occasionally other men. "But that's not what I'm paying you for." "You're not paying me at all," Lucy replied, finally looking up at him. "Every penny goes toward my father's debt." Emmett's face remained impassive. "A debt is a debt, Miss Collins. Your father borrowed money to keep that failing homestead of his afloat. Then he had the poor judgment to die before settling accounts." Lucy felt her jaw clench. Her father had died just 8 months ago, a riding accident that left her alone with a mortgage. She couldn't pay, and Emmett Blackwater breathing down her neck for the money her father had borrowed. When she couldn't make the payments, Blackwater had offered her a position at his ranch, cooking, cleaning, and tending to whatever needed doing. "How much longer?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her throat for months. "At your current rate." Emmett seemed to calculate in his head. "Another 2 years, give or take. 2 more years of rising before dawn and collapsing into bed well after dark. 2 more years of Emmett's lingering glances that made her skin crawl. 2 more years of working until she dropped from exhaustion each night. Unless, of course," Emmett added, his voice softening in a way that set Lucy's nerves on edge, "you'd consider another arrangement." Lucy stood quickly, shouldering her rifle. "I've told you before, Mr. Blackwater, I'll work until I drop, but that's all I'll do." A scowl passed over his face. "Pride's a luxury you can't afford, girl. Think about it." He turned and walked back toward the main house, leaving Lucy alone with the bitter taste of anger in her mouth. She waited until he was out of sight before letting her shoulders slump. At 22, Lucy had never imagined her life would come to this, a virtual prisoner on another man's land, working to pay off a debt that seemed to grow rather than shrink with each passing month. Gathering the remaining bottles, Lucy tucked her rifle under her arm and headed for the kitchen. The ranch hands would be coming in for breakfast soon, and if there was one thing Emmett Blackwater didn't tolerate, it was tardiness in serving meals. The ranch kitchen was already warm from the fire Lucy had started before dawn. She hung her coat on a peg by the door, rolled up her sleeves, and tied an apron around her waist. Her long brown hair was secured in a practical braid that hung down her back, though a few strands had escaped to frame her face. In another life, Lucy might have cared about the smudges of dirt on her hands or the worn patches on her dress, but vanity was another luxury she'd long since abandoned. She worked quickly, mixing biscuit dough and frying salt pork. The familiar movements allowed her mind to wander, as it often did, to thoughts of escape. She'd considered running away countless times, but where would she go? Her father's homestead had been sold to cover part of his debt. She had no relatives, no friends wealthy enough to take her in. And a single woman traveling alone would face dangers perhaps worse than her current situation. The sound of boots on the porch interrupted her thoughts. The ranch hands were early. Lucy hastily wiped her hands on her apron and reached for the coffee pot. But when the door opened, it wasn't one of the regular hands who entered. The man who stood in the doorway was a stranger, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a travel-worn duster and a hat pulled low over his eyes. "Kitchen's not open to visitors," Lucy said, keeping her distance. "If you're looking for work, you'll need to speak with Mr. Blackwater." The stranger pushed his hat back, revealing a face bronzed by the sun and a pair of startlingly blue eyes. "Actually, madam, I've already spoken with him. Name's Benjamin Hayes. I'm the new foreman." Lucy blinked in surprise. Emmett hadn't mentioned hiring a new foreman, though the previous one had left abruptly 2 weeks ago after a disagreement. "Mr. Blackwater didn't tell me," she said cautiously. Ben smiled, and Lucy was struck by how it transformed his face, softening the hard angles and lighting up those remarkable eyes. "He only hired me yesterday evening, said to come by this morning and get settled." He glanced around the kitchen. "Something smells mighty fine." "Breakfast for the hands," Lucy explained, turning back to her work to hide the inexplicable flush she felt rising to her cheeks. "It'll be ready soon enough." "Need any help?" Ben offered, already shrugging off his duster. Lucy stared at him. In 6 months, not one of the ranch hands had ever offered to help her with the cooking. "No, thank you, this is my job." Ben nodded but didn't leave. Instead, he took a seat at the kitchen table, folding his long frame into one of the wooden chairs. "Don't mind if I wait, do you?" "Been riding since first light." There was something about him, a quiet confidence that didn't venture into arrogance, that made Lucy curious. She found herself studying him as she worked. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck, the strong hands that looked accustomed to hard work, the way his gaze took in everything around him with calm assessment. "Where are you from, Mr. Hayes?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. "Montana originally. Been working ranches all over the territory for the past few years." He watched her move around the kitchen. "And you don't seem like the usual ranch cook." Lucy hesitated. She wasn't in the habit of sharing her circumstances with strangers. "I grew up around here." Before Ben could press further, the door banged open and 3 ranch hands trooped in, bringing with them the smell of horses and morning dew. "Morning, Miss Collins," one of them called. Then they noticed Ben, and the atmosphere shifted subtly. "Who's this?" asked a wiry hand named Pete, his eyes narrowing. Ben stood, extending his hand. "Benjamin Hayes, new foreman." The men exchanged glances. "Blackwater hired a new foreman without telling nobody." Pete didn't take the offered hand. "Seems so," Ben replied, unfazed by the cold reception. "Looking forward to working with you all." The tension in the room was palpable. Lucy knew why Blackwater Ranch had unwritten hierarchies, and a new foreman meant changes to the established order. She busied herself serving breakfast, hoping to diffuse the situation. "Food's ready," she announced, setting a platter of biscuits on the table. "Better eat while it's hot." The men settled around the table, their wariness of Ben temporarily overshadowed by hunger. Lucy served them efficiently, keeping her eyes down and her movements brisk. This was her routine, invisible unless needed, silent unless spoken to. But she felt Ben's gaze following her, and it made her uncomfortably aware of the patches on her dress and the roughness of her hands. As the men ate, more hands arrived, and soon the kitchen was filled with the sounds of conversation and clinking utensils. Lucy kept the coffee flowing and the platters replenished, moving between the stove and the table with practiced ease. "Miss Collins," Ben said when she passed by him, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "you haven't eaten anything." Lucy blinked in surprise. No one ever noticed whether she ate or not. "I'll eat later," she replied automatically. Ben frowned slightly but didn't press the issue. When he finished his meal, he carried his plate to the wash basin, another action that set him apart from the other men, who simply left their dishes for Lucy to clear. "Thank you for breakfast," he said before stepping out the door. "Best meal I've had in a long while." After he left, Lucy found herself pausing in her work, momentarily disoriented by the simple courtesy. Then she shook herself and returned to clearing the table. Benjamin Hayes might be different from the other men at Blackwater Ranch, but he was still part of this place, a place where she was little more than property, until her debt was paid. That evening, after serving supper and cleaning the kitchen, Lucy made her way to the small cabin at the edge of the ranch property that Emmett had designated as her quarters. It was barely more than a shack, a single room with a narrow bed, a small table, and a wood stove, but it offered privacy, which was something Lucy had come to value highly. She was surprised to find Ben sitting on her porch steps, seemingly lost in thought as he gazed up at the stars. "Mr. Hayes," she said, stopping a few feet away. "Can I help you with something?" Ben stood quickly, removing his hat. "Miss Collins, I apologize for intruding. I was just—" He hesitated, then gestured toward the sky. "It's a clear night. You can see every star." Lucy followed his gaze upward. The sky was indeed spectacular, a vast expanse of black velvet studded with brilliant points of light. For a moment, she allowed herself to be captivated by the beauty of it. "I won't keep you," Ben said, breaking the silence. "I just wanted to ask about the situation here at the ranch. The men seem unsettled." Lucy hesitated. Discussing ranch business wasn't her place, but as foreman, Ben needed to understand what he was walking into. The previous foreman, Mr. Turner, left after arguing with Mr. Blackwater about some missing cattle. There were accusations made. What kind of accusations? That Mr. Turner was selling off stock on the side, Lucy explained, lowering her voice even though there was no one around to hear. Mr. Turner denied it, of course, but Mr. Blackwater was convinced. Ben nodded thoughtfully. "And the men, where do they stand?" "Some sided with Mr. Turner, others." Lucy shrugged. "It's complicated. Mr. Blackwater isn't an easy man to work for." "And what about you?" Ben asked, his eyes finding hers in the dim light. "How do you find working for Mr. Blackwater?" The question was direct but not intrusive. Still, Lucy felt her defenses rise. "I do my job, Mr. Hayes. That's all that matters." Ben seemed to sense her reluctance to say more. He nodded again, settling his hat back on his head. "I won't keep you any longer. Good night, Miss Collins." "Good night, Mr. Hayes." Lucy watched him walk away, his silhouette gradually disappearing into the darkness. Then she entered her cabin, lit a lamp, and began preparing for bed with mechanical efficiency. As she lay on her narrow cot, she found herself thinking about Benjamin Hayes and his unexpected courtesies. He didn't fit into the brutal landscape of Blackwater Ranch, where kindness was as rare as rain in August. In her experience, men who showed kindness usually wanted something in return. What did Benjamin Hayes want? And why couldn't she stop thinking about those blue eyes? Morning came too soon, as it always did. Lucy rose before dawn, dressed quickly in the cold cabin, and made her way to the main house to start breakfast. The sky was just beginning to lighten as she crossed the yard, her breath forming clouds in the crisp air. She was surprised to find the kitchen already warm, a fire blazing in the stove. Ben stood at the counter, measuring coffee into the pot. "Mr. Hayes," she said, momentarily flustered. "What are you doing?" He glanced up with a smile that seemed to brighten the dim kitchen. "Good morning, Miss Collins. Thought I'd get the fire going for you. Hope you don't mind." Lucy wasn't sure how to respond. No one had ever considered her comfort before. "Thank you," she said finally, untying her coat. "But you needn't trouble yourself. This is my work." "It's no trouble," Ben replied, stepping aside as she approached the stove. "I'm an early riser. Always have been." Lucy busied herself with breakfast preparations, acutely aware of Ben's presence as he sat at the table, sipping coffee. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged with something Lucy couldn't quite name. "Mr. Hayes," she said eventually, needing to break the quiet, "might I ask why Mr. Blackwater hired you?" Ben considered the question. "He said he needed someone who could handle the men and wasn't afraid of hard decisions. Offered good wages." He paused. "Truth is, I was passing through on my way to Oregon. Wasn't planning to stop long in Republic." "What changed your mind?" Something flickered across Ben's face, an emotion Lucy couldn't identify. "Let's just say I saw something that made me think I might be needed here." Before Lucy could question him further, the kitchen door opened and Emmett Blackwater himself entered, stopping short at the sight of Ben at the table. "Hayes," he acknowledged with a nod. "You're up early." "Wanted to get a feel for the place before we start work," Ben replied easily. Emmett's eyes moved to Lucy, narrowing slightly. "Breakfast ready yet, girl?" "Nearly, Mr. Blackwater," Lucy answered, turning back to the stove to hide her expression. She hated when he called her girl, a subtle reminder of what he considered her place. "Good. I've got men coming in from the north pasture today. Need them fed and back out by mid-morning." Emmett poured himself coffee, then addressed Ben. "I want you to ride out with them, see how they work, get a sense of who's worth keeping on." "Yes, sir," Ben said, his tone neutral. Emmett lingered, watching Lucy as she worked. She could feel his eyes on her back, a sensation that always made her skin crawl. When he finally left, Lucy released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Ben was watching her, his expression thoughtful. "How long have you been working here, Miss Collins?" "6 months," Lucy answered, focusing on slicing bread. "And before that," Lucy hesitated. "I lived with my father. He had a homestead about 10 miles east of here. He passed away last summer." Lucy kept her voice steady through years of practice. "There were debts. Mr. Blackwater offered me work to pay them off." Ben was silent for a long moment. "I see," he said finally, and something in his tone made Lucy look up. His blue eyes had hardened, and his jaw was set in a way that transformed his usually open expression into something more guarded. "It was a fair arrangement," Lucy said quickly, though she wasn't sure why she felt the need to defend Emmett Blackwater. "I had nowhere else to go." Ben didn't respond directly. Instead, he asked, "How much longer before the debt is paid?" 2 years, Lucy replied, the words tasting bitter. "Maybe more." "I see," Ben repeated, and this time there was a definite edge to his voice. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work for Lucy. She served breakfast to the hands, cleaned the kitchen, began preparations for dinner, mended torn shirts, and even helped the housekeeper clean the main house. By afternoon, her back ached and her hands were raw from hot water and lye soap, but she kept moving. Rest was another luxury she couldn't afford. From the kitchen window, she occasionally caught glimpses of Ben as he moved around the ranch, talking with the hands, inspecting equipment, examining the horses. He worked with a focused efficiency that Lucy admired, and the men seemed to respond to his straightforward manner better than they had to the previous foreman's bullying tactics. As dusk approached, Lucy was kneading bread dough when the kitchen door opened. She looked up, expecting one of the hands coming in early for coffee, but instead found Emmett Blackwater standing there, watching her with an expression that made her hands still in the dough. "Mr. Blackwater," she acknowledged, trying to keep her voice steady. "Dinner won't be ready for another hour." "I'm not here about dinner." Emmett moved closer until he was standing on the other side of the work table. "I've been thinking about our arrangement." Lucy's heart began to pound. "What about it, sir?" 2 years is a long time," Emmett said, his eyes moving over her face down to her throat and lower. "A young woman like you spending your best years working yourself to the bone seems a waste." Lucy remained silent, her hands clenched in the bread dough. "I could forgive the debt," Emmett continued, his voice softening to what he probably thought was an enticing tone. "All of it, today." "In exchange for what?" Lucy asked, though she knew the answer. Emmett smiled, revealing teeth stained from tobacco. "Marry me. Be the mistress of Blackwater Ranch instead of its servant." Lucy felt a cold wave of revulsion wash over her. "Mr. Blackwater, don't answer now," he interrupted. "Think about it. I'm offering you a comfortable life, Lucy. No more scrubbing floors or cooking for ungrateful cowboys. You'd have nice dresses, a fine house, respect in town." "And if I decline?" Lucy asked, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. Emmett's expression hardened. "Then nothing changes. You work until every cent is paid, however long that takes." He paused, then added with deliberate casualness, "Of course, I might have miscalculated the original debt. Numbers can be tricky things." The threat was clear. Lucy fought to keep her face impassive. "I'll think about it," she said, the words like ashes in her mouth. Emmett nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good girl. I'll expect your answer by the end of the week." He turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Lucy, I'd appreciate if you kept this between us. No need for the hands to know our private business." After he left, Lucy stood motionless, her hands still buried in the bread dough, now gone cold. She felt trapped in a tightening noose. Marrying Emmett Blackwater was unthinkable. The man was nearly twice her age, and the thought of his hands on her made her stomach turn. But defying him meant potentially never escaping her debt and enduring whatever miscalculations he might suddenly discover. "Miss Collins." A voice broke into her thoughts, and Lucy looked up to find Ben standing in the doorway, his expression concerned. "Are you all right?" Lucy hastily wiped her hands on her apron, aware that tears had begun to form in her eyes. "Fine, Mr. Hayes. Just tired." Ben didn't look convinced. He stepped into the kitchen, closing the door behind him. "I saw Blackwater leaving. Did he say something to upset you?" "It's nothing," Lucy insisted, turning away to hide her face. "Just ranch business." Ben was silent for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I've been asking around town about Emmett Blackwater. Seems he has a reputation for acquiring property by any means necessary. And for pressuring women who work for him." Lucy's hands stilled on the counter. "People talk too much." "Sometimes they don't talk enough," Ben countered. He moved closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. "Miss Collins, Lucy, if you're in trouble, maybe I can help." The gentleness in his voice nearly undid her. Lucy had been handling her problems alone for so long that the offer of help was almost too much to bear. She blinked rapidly, fighting back tears. "No one can help me, Mr. Hayes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But thank you for the offer." Ben didn't press further, seeming to understand her need to regain composure. "The offer stands," he said simply. "Anytime." He turned to leave, but Lucy found herself calling after him. "Mr. Hayes." Ben paused, looking back. Why do you care?" Lucy asked, genuinely puzzled. "You don't even know me." Ben seemed to consider the question carefully. "Maybe not," he agreed. "But I know what it's like to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control. And I know that sometimes all it takes is one person willing to extend a hand." With that, he left, leaving Lucy with a strange warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. The next few days passed in a blur for Lucy. She went about her duties mechanically, all the while turning over Emmett's proposal in her mind. Each time she thought of accepting, bile rose in her throat. But each time she thought of refusing, fear gripped her heart. The end of the week was approaching rapidly, and soon she would have to give Emmett an answer. Meanwhile, she found herself watching Ben as he settled into his role as foreman. The men had initially been suspicious, but his fair treatment and willingness to work alongside them had quickly earned their respect. Lucy noticed that he treated everyone with the same quiet courtesy, from Emmett Blackwater himself down to the youngest stable boy. And he continued to show her small kindnesses, starting the kitchen fire in the mornings, carrying heavy water buckets when he happened to be nearby, making sure she ate something during the busy meal times. These gestures, so unexpected in her world, created a confusion in Lucy that was both painful and sweet. On Wednesday evening, Lucy was returning to her cabin when she heard voices coming from the barn. She recognized Emmett's angry tone immediately and slowed her steps, not wanting to intrude on what sounded like an argument. "I don't care what it takes," Emmett was saying. "Those cattle need to be moved before the buyer arrives." "The men are already working double shifts," Ben's voice replied, calm but firm. "Pushing them harder won't get the job done faster. It'll just lead to mistakes. I'm not paying you to coddle them, Hayes. I'm paying you to get results. And I will. But not by driving men and horses to exhaustion." There was a pause, then Emmett's voice, lower and more menacing. "Let me be clear. I make the decisions on this ranch. Your job is to carry them out. If that's a problem for you, there are plenty of other men looking for work." "No problem, sir," Ben replied, his tone still level. "I just believe in doing things right the first time." Lucy heard footsteps approaching the barn door and quickly moved away, continuing toward her cabin. She didn't want either man to know she had overheard their conversation. But as she lay in bed that night, Lucy found herself thinking about the exchange. Ben had stood his ground against Emmett, something few men dared to do. There was a quiet strength in him that Lucy admired, a principled backbone that didn't bend to intimidation. It made her wonder what Ben would think of her if she accepted Emmett's proposal out of fear. Thursday morning dawned gray and threatening rain. Lucy rose and dressed as usual, but as she reached for her coat, a wave of dizziness washed over her. She gripped the edge of the table, waiting for it to pass. When it didn't, she sank into the room's single chair, her head spinning. She had been pushing herself too hard, she realized. Between the regular work and the extra tasks Emmett had been piling on, perhaps deliberately, to wear her down, Lucy had barely been sleeping or eating properly for days. Nevertheless, she forced herself to stand. The hands needed to be fed, regardless of how she felt. Lucy made her way toward the main house, moving more slowly than usual, her body protesting every step. She had just reached the kitchen door when another wave of dizziness hit, stronger this time. Lucy reached for the doorframe to steady herself, but her hand missed, and suddenly the ground was rushing up to meet her. The next thing Lucy knew, she was looking up at Ben's concerned face. She was lying on something soft, the kitchen sofa, she realized, and Ben was kneeling beside her, his hand cool against her forehead. "Miss Collins, can you hear me?" Lucy tried to sit up, but Ben gently pressed her shoulder, keeping her in place. "Don't try to move yet. You fainted." "The breakfast," Lucy protested weakly. "The men are grown men who can wait," Ben interrupted firmly. "When was the last time you ate something, Lucy?" The use of her first name barely registered through her disorientation. "Yesterday, I think, at lunch." Ben's expression darkened. "And sleep?" Lucy closed her eyes, too tired to pretend. "Not much." Ben was silent for a moment. Then he stood, moving to the stove where the fire was already burning. Lucy watched as he efficiently cracked eggs into a pan and placed bread to toast. "Mr. Hayes, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," Ben said, his back to her as he worked. "Because apparently no one else around here notices when a woman is working herself to collapse." There was an edge of anger in his voice that surprised Lucy. When he turned back to her, carrying a plate of eggs and toast, his expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his jaw. "Eat," he said, placing the plate beside her. "Slowly." Lucy didn't have the strength to argue. She managed to sit up with Ben's help and began to eat small bites of the food. It was simple but delicious, and only when she started eating did Lucy realize how hungry she had been. Ben watched her for a moment, then moved to the stove to prepare coffee. "You're not going to work today," he said over his shoulder. Lucy nearly choked on her toast. "Of course I am." "Who will?" "I'll handle it," Ben interrupted. "The men can take turns with the cooking for one day. It won't kill them." "Mr. Blackwater won't like it," Lucy warned. Ben's expression hardened. "Mr. Blackwater doesn't need to know. As far as he's concerned, everything is running smoothly." Lucy stared at him, not understanding why this virtual stranger was going to such lengths for her. "Why are you doing this, Mr. Hayes?" Ben poured coffee into a mug and brought it to her before answering. "Because it's the right thing to do." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "and because I can't stand by and watch him break you." The simple honesty in his words brought unexpected tears to Lucy's eyes. She blinked them away, focusing on her coffee. "I'm stronger than I look," she said after a moment. "I know," Ben replied, and the respect in his voice warmed her more than the coffee. "But everyone has limits. Even you, Lucy Collins." The way he said her name like it was something precious created a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with her physical weakness. True to his word, Ben arranged for the ranch hands to take turns with the cooking that day. He brought Lucy back to her cabin and made sure she had water, food, and firewood before heading out to oversee the day's work. Lucy slept most of the morning, her body gratefully surrendering to the rest it had been denied for too long. When she woke in the afternoon, she felt stronger. She used the time to mend some of her clothing and wash her hair, small luxuries she rarely had time for. As evening approached, she was preparing a simple meal for herself when a knock came at her door. Ben stood on her porch, hat in hand, looking slightly uncertain. "Just checking to see how you're feeling," he said. "Much better, thank you," Lucy replied, genuinely touched by his concern. Would you like to come in for some tea?" Ben hesitated, clearly aware of the impropriety of entering a single woman's home alone, but after a moment he nodded. "Thank you." Lucy's cabin was small but neat. She gestured for Ben to sit at the table while she prepared the tea. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sounds of the kettle and the crackle of the fire in the stove. "Did Mr. Blackwater notice my absence?" Lucy asked as she placed a mug of tea before Ben. "He did," Ben admitted. "I told him you were ill and that I'd arranged for the work to be covered. He wasn't happy, but he didn't make much of a fuss." Lucy sat across from Ben, cradling her own mug. "That's surprising." Ben took a sip of his tea before responding. "I think he had other things on his mind. A cattle buyer arrived from Seattle this afternoon, the one he's been preparing for. That's why he's been pushing so hard to get that herd moved." Lucy nodded, understanding dawning. The cattle sale explained Emmett's increasing pressure on the ranch hands and perhaps his sudden proposal to her as well. If the sale went through, he would have money to spend on a wife, on improving the ranch house, on expanding his empire. "Lucy," Ben said, his voice drawing her from her thoughts, "there's something I need to tell you." Something in his tone made Lucy's heart beat faster. "What is it?" Ben set down his mug, his blue eyes serious as they met hers. "I didn't come to Republic by accident. And I didn't take this job just because it was offered." Lucy's hands tightened around her mug. "I don't understand." "I knew your father," Ben said quietly. "James Collins. We worked together years ago, driving cattle up from Oregon. He was a good man, honest, hardworking. When I heard he'd passed and that his daughter was working off his debt at Blackwater Ranch, I came to see if I could help." Lucy stared at him, trying to process this revelation. "You knew my father. Why didn't you say anything before?" "I needed to understand the situation first," Ben explained. "To see what kind of man Emmett Blackwater is. To find out exactly what happened with your father's debt." "And," Lucy prompted, her voice barely above a whisper. Ben's expression darkened. "From what I've learned in town, your father borrowed $500 from Blackwater last spring. But the note I found in Blackwater's office shows a debt of $1,500. Lucy felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. That's impossible. How could he?" "Interest," Ben said grimly. "Compounded monthly at a rate that would make a banker blush, plus fees for late payments. It's all written out in language most people wouldn't understand, but the effect is clear. Your father could have worked his entire life and never paid off that debt, and neither will you." Lucy's hands began to shake so badly that she had to set down her mug. The suspicion that had been growing in her mind for months that Emmett was deliberately keeping her indebted to him was now confirmed. And if what Ben said was true, her situation was even more hopeless than she had thought. "What can I do?" she whispered, more to herself than to Ben. To her surprise, Ben reached across the table and covered her hand with his own. His touch was warm and steady. "Let me help you," he said simply. Lucy looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or ulterior motive. She found only genuine concern and something else, a warmth that made her breath catch. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You barely know me." "I knew your father," Ben repeated, "and I've come to know you over these past days, Lucy. You're strong, hardworking, kind despite everything that's happened to you." He paused, then added quietly, "And no one deserves to be treated the way Blackwater has treated you." Lucy felt tears building behind her eyes. For so long she had carried her burden alone, convinced there was no way out. The sudden appearance of an ally of hope was almost too much to bear. "What can you possibly do against Emmett Blackwater?" she asked, voicing her greatest fear. "He owns half the county. No one stands against him." A slow smile spread across Ben's face, transforming his serious expression into something that made Lucy's heart skip. "I'm not no one, Lucy Collins, and neither are you." The next morning, Lucy insisted on returning to work despite Ben's objections. "If I suddenly start taking days off, Mr. Blackwater will know something is different," she reasoned. "We need to proceed as normal." Ben reluctantly agreed, but made her promise to pace herself and to eat regular meals. Lucy found herself smiling at his concern, a real smile, the kind she hadn't felt on her face in months. As she prepared breakfast in the kitchen, Lucy was aware of a new energy flowing through her. The knowledge that Ben was working to help her, that he believed in her cause, gave her strength she hadn't realized she still possessed. The kitchen door opened, and Lucy looked up, expecting to see Ben. Instead, Emmett Blackwater stood there, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Blackwater," Lucy acknowledged, keeping her voice neutral, Feeling better, I hear, Emmett said, moving into the kitchen. Hayes said you were ill yesterday. Yes, sir. Just tired, I think. Lucy continued working, trying to ignore the way Emmett was watching her. You've been working hard, he agreed, his tone softening in that way that always set Lucy's teeth on edge. Too hard, perhaps. Have you given any thought to my proposal? Lucy's hands stilled momentarily before she forced them back to their task. I have, Mr. Blackwater. I'm very flattered. But I need more time to consider. Emmett's face darkened. Tomorrow is the end of the week, Lucy. I expect an answer then. He paused, then added with deliberate casualness, By the way, I've been reviewing your father's debt. It seems I may have underestimated the interest that's accumulated. Lucy felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her expression carefully blank. Is that so, sir? Yes. By my new calculations, you'll be working here for at least 3 more years. Emmett watched her face closely. Unless, of course, you accept my proposal. Then all debts would be forgiven immediately. Lucy swallowed hard, fighting to control her anger and fear. I understand, Mr. Blackwater. I'll have my answer for you tomorrow. Emmett nodded, seemingly satisfied. See that you do. He turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Lucy. You'd be wise to keep our arrangement private, especially from Hayes. He's new here, and I'm not entirely sure I trust him yet. After Emmett left, Lucy gripped the edge of the counter, her knuckles white. Her situation had just become even more precarious. If Emmett suspected that she and Ben were conspiring against him, she was still standing there when Ben entered the kitchen a few minutes later. One look at her face told him something was wrong. What happened? He asked, closing the door behind him. Lucy glanced around to ensure they were alone before speaking in a low voice. Mr. Blackwater was just here. He's added another year to my debt, and he wants my answer about marrying him by tomorrow. Ben's expression hardened. He proposed to you, Lucy nodded miserably, earlier this week. He said he'd forgive the debt entirely if I married him. A muscle worked in Ben's jaw. And if you refuse, then I work for 3 more years or longer if he decides to recalculate again. Ben was silent for a moment, his blue eyes stormy with anger. Then he said quietly, We need to move faster than I planned. Can you meet me tonight, at your cabin after everyone's asleep? Lucy hesitated, but only briefly. She trusted Ben in a way she couldn't fully explain even to herself. Yes, but be careful. Mr. Blackwater said he doesn't trust you. Ben's mouth curved in a grim smile. The feeling is mutual. Don't worry, Lucy. This will end soon, one way or another. The day dragged endlessly for Lucy. She went about her duties mechanically, her mind occupied with what might happen that night. She saw little of Ben, who was busy with the cattle buyer and overseeing the ranch hands, but occasionally their eyes would meet across the yard, and Lucy would feel a surge of that inexplicable connection between them. By evening, her nerves were stretched thin. She served dinner to the hands, cleaned the kitchen, and retired to her cabin earlier than usual, pleading a headache when one of the men asked if she was going to join them for cards in her cabin. Lucy paced anxiously, watching the moon rise through her small window. What was Ben planning? And what would happen if Emmett discovered their scheme? Just after midnight, a soft knock came at her door. Lucy opened it to find Ben standing there, his expression serious. May I come in? He asked. Lucy nodded, stepping aside. Ben entered, removing his hat, and Lucy was struck again by how tall he was, how he seemed to fill her small cabin with his presence. I've been going through Blackwater's records, Ben said without preamble. The original loan to your father was legitimate, but everything else, the interest, the fees, the extensions, it's all fraud. He's been manipulating the numbers from the beginning. Lucy felt a surge of vindication, quickly followed by despair. But how can we prove it? It's his word against ours, and in this county his word is law." "Not quite," Ben replied. He reached into his coat and pulled out several folded papers. "I found these in his office safe. Copies of the original loan agreement with your father, along with Blackwater's private ledger showing the actual calculations. The difference is clear as day." Lucy stared at the papers, hope and disbelief warring within her. "You broke into his safe." A smile flickered across Ben's face. "Let's just say I have certain skills from my younger days that occasionally come in handy." Lucy shook her head in amazement. "Even with these papers, what can we do? No judge in Republic would rule against Emmett Blackwater." "We don't need a local judge," Ben explained. "The territorial marshal is in Colville, just 2 days' ride from here. He has jurisdiction over cases of fraud, especially when they involve manipulation of property rights. We take these papers to him, and Blackwater will have some serious explaining to do." Lucy sat down on the edge of her bed, trying to absorb what Ben was suggesting. "You want us to leave, to go to Colville?" Ben knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Tomorrow, early before anyone is awake. I have horses ready at the livery stable in town." "But what about Emmett?" "He'll come after us." "Let him," Ben said, and there was steel in his voice. "I've faced worse than Emmett Blackwater." Lucy searched his face, finding nothing but determination and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. "Why are you doing this, Ben? The truth this time." Ben's hands tightened around hers. "When I heard about your situation, I came to Republic to help because I respected your father. But now—" He hesitated, then continued more softly, "Now I'm doing it for you, Lucy. Because in just these few days, I've come to care for you in a way I didn't expect." The simple honesty in his words took Lucy's breath away. For 6 months, she had existed in a state of constant anxiety and loneliness, believing there was no escape from her situation. Now this man, this remarkable man, was offering her not just freedom, but something she had never dared to hope for, a chance at happiness. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," Ben replied gently, "but sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway." Lucy looked at their joined hands, her small, work-roughened ones enclosed in his larger, equally calloused ones. Hands that had both known hard work, hands that seemed to fit together perfectly. "All right," she said finally, raising her eyes to his. "Tomorrow." The relief and joy that spread across Ben's face made something warm unfurl in Lucy's chest. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a brief, gentle kiss. When she pulled back, Ben was looking at her with such tenderness that Lucy felt tears prick at her eyes. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "We both need rest for tomorrow. Pack only what you absolutely need. We'll be traveling light and fast." Lucy nodded, already mentally sorting through her meager possessions. "What time?" "Just before dawn. I'll meet you at the edge of the creek, where the property line meets the main road." After Ben left, Lucy moved around her small cabin with quiet efficiency, gathering the few items she couldn't bear to leave behind. Her mother's locket, a small daguerreotype of her parents, a book her father had given her for her 16th birthday, and a change of clothing. Everything fit into a single small bag. As she lay down to try to sleep, Lucy found her mind racing with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and that new, fragile hope that Ben had kindled within her. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would no longer be a prisoner of Blackwater Ranch. One way or another, her life was about to change forever. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky when Lucy slipped out of her cabin. The ranch was quiet, the only sounds the occasional lowing of cattle in the distant pastures and the soft rustle of wind through the pines. Lucy moved quickly but carefully, staying close to the shadows of buildings and trees as she made her way toward the creek. Her heart was pounding so loudly she was sure anyone within 100 yards would hear it. The small bag clutched in her hand contained everything she owned in the world. Everything except her freedom that she was about to reclaim. The creek came into view, its surface reflecting the pink-tinged sky. Lucy paused, scanning the area for any sign of Ben. For a terrifying moment, she thought he might not come, that she had misplaced her trust once again. Then a figure emerged from the trees on the far side of the creek, leading 2 horses. Even from a distance, Lucy recognized Ben's broad-shouldered silhouette. Relief flooded through her as she hurried forward. Ben helped her across the creek, his hands strong and steady as she navigated the slippery rocks. "Ready?" he asked when she reached him. Lucy nodded, not trusting her voice. Ben helped her mount one of the horses, a sturdy bay mare that stood calmly as Lucy settled into the saddle. He tied her small bag behind the saddle, then swung up onto his own horse, a tall chestnut gelding. "We'll ride north for a few miles, then cut east toward Colville," Ben explained in a low voice. "With luck, no one will notice we're gone until after breakfast." They set off at a steady trot, keeping to the tree line where possible to avoid being seen from the ranch. Lucy found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, expecting at any moment to hear shouts of pursuit or the thunder of hoofbeats behind them. But the only sounds were the rhythmic breathing of their horses and the occasional call of a morning bird. As the sun rose fully above the horizon, painting the landscape in gold, Lucy began to believe they might actually succeed. They rode in companionable silence for several hours, stopping briefly around midday to rest the horses and eat some of the provisions Ben had packed. Lucy found herself studying Ben as he checked the horses' hooves and adjusted their saddles, the confident movements of his hands, the way the sunlight brought out auburn highlights in his brown hair, the quiet concentration in his blue eyes. "What will you do?" she asked suddenly. "After we reach Colville, I mean, when the marshal settles this matter with Emmett," Ben straightened, considering her question. "I hadn't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "I was planning to continue to Oregon, maybe look for ranch work there." He paused, then added more softly, "But plans can change." The implication in his words sent a flutter through Lucy's stomach. Before she could respond, however, Ben tensed, his gaze fixed on the horizon behind them. "Riders," he said tersely. 4 or 5 moving fast." Lucy turned, her heart sinking as she saw the distant dust cloud. Emmett, probably. Ben was already gathering their things, his movements quick but not panicked. "They're still a few miles back, but they'll be gaining on us. We need to move." They remounted and set off at a faster pace, pushing the horses harder than before. Lucy's mare responded gamely, but Lucy could feel her tiring as the afternoon wore on. The terrain was growing more rugged, with steeper hills and denser forests that slowed their progress. "We won't outrun them like this," Ben said after checking behind them again. "We need to find somewhere to hide until dark." Lucy scanned the landscape. They were passing through a narrow valley with forested ridges rising on either side. "Up there," she suggested, pointing to a dense stand of pines halfway up the eastern ridge. "My father and I used to hunt in these hills. There are caves in those rocks." Ben nodded, immediately turning his horse toward the ridge. They dismounted when the slope grew too steep for riding, leading the horses carefully through the trees. The going was slow and difficult, but when Lucy glanced back, she saw with relief that they had left the main trail far behind. If Emmett and his men continued straight through the valley, they might pass by without spotting their quarry. The cave, Lucy remembered, was smaller than she recalled, but large enough to conceal them and the horses. Ben led the animals deep into the cave, where they stood quietly, seeming to sense the need for silence. Lucy and Ben positioned themselves near the entrance, where they could watch the valley below without being seen. Sure enough, about 20 minutes later a group of riders appeared, moving swiftly along the trail they had recently left. Lucy's breath caught as she recognized Emmett at the head of the group, his distinctive gray hat visible even from a distance. Behind him rode 4 of his ranch hands, all armed with rifles. "They look angry," Lucy whispered. "They are," Ben replied grimly. "Blackwater knows what we took from his safe. He's not just chasing a runaway servant anymore, he's trying to protect himself from exposure." The riders slowed as they reached the point where Ben and Lucy had left the trail. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed they might detect the signs of their ascent up the ridge. But after a brief consultation, Emmett gestured forward, and the group continued down the valley. Lucy exhaled slowly, her shoulders sagging with relief. "What now?" "We wait until dark," Ben said. "Then continue east, staying off the main trails. It will take longer to reach Colville, but it's safer." As the adrenaline of their flight began to fade, Lucy became aware of her exhaustion. She hadn't slept well the night before, and the physical and emotional strain of the day was taking its toll. "Rest," Ben suggested, noticing her fatigue. "I'll keep watch." Lucy wanted to protest, but her body betrayed her with a jaw-cracking yawn. She settled against the cave wall, using her bag as a pillow. "Wake me in a few hours," she murmured. "You need rest too." Ben's only response was a gentle smile. The last thing Lucy saw before her eyes drifted closed was Ben's profile silhouetted against the cave entrance, strong and vigilant. She woke to darkness and the soft sound of rain. For a moment, Lucy was disoriented, forgetting where she was. Then she felt the hard stone beneath her and remembered. The cave, the escape, Ben. She sat up quickly, looking around. Ben was still at the cave entrance, his figure barely visible in the dim light. "How long did I sleep?" Lucy asked, moving to join him. "A few hours," Ben replied. "The rain started about an hour ago." Lucy listened to the steady patter of raindrops on the leaves outside. "This is good, isn't it?" "It will wash away our tracks." "Yes, but it also makes travel more difficult, especially at night." Ben turned to her, his face shadowed in the darkness. "I think we should wait until morning." Lucy nodded, understanding the wisdom of his decision even as impatience gnawed at her. Every hour they delayed was another hour Emmett had to search for them, or worse, to prepare his defense against the evidence they carried. "Are you hungry?" Ben asked, reaching for his saddlebag. "I have some jerky and hardtack." Lucy accepted the simple fare gratefully. They ate in comfortable silence, listening to the rain and the occasional soft nickering of the horses deeper in the cave. "Tell me about Oregon," Lucy said eventually, wanting to fill the quiet with something other than her own anxious thoughts. "Why were you heading there?" Ben seemed surprised by the question, but he answered readily enough. "My uncle has a ranch near Portland. He's getting older, having trouble managing the place. Asked if I'd consider taking it over eventually." "You'd be a rancher in your own right," Lucy observed, "not just a foreman." "That was the idea," Ben agreed. "It's good land, fertile valleys, plenty of water, mild winters compared to here. A man could build something worthwhile there." Lucy heard the wistfulness in his voice. "It sounds wonderful." Ben was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "It could be. For the right person, or persons." The implication in his words hung in the air between them. Lucy felt her pulse quicken, but before she could respond, Ben stood abruptly. "I thought I heard something," he explained, moving to the cave entrance. Lucy tensed, straining her ears. At first, she heard nothing beyond the steady patter of rain. Then, faintly, came the sound of voices and the distinctive clink of metal on stone, perhaps a horseshoe striking rock. "They're coming up the ridge," Ben whispered, moving back to Lucy's side. Someone must have spotted our tracks before the rain started. Lucy's heart began to pound. "What do we do? We're trapped here." Ben was already moving, gathering their belongings with swift efficiency. "Not trapped. There must be another way out of this cave." Lucy shook her head. "I don't think so. It doesn't go very deep." "Then we'll have to face them," Ben said grimly, drawing his revolver and checking the chambers. "Lucy, listen to me. If anything happens, take the documents and ride east. Don't stop until you reach Colville." "I'm not leaving you," Lucy protested, her voice rising slightly before she caught herself and lowered it again. "We do this together." Ben looked as if he wanted to argue, but the sounds outside were growing closer. "Stay behind me," he ordered, moving toward the cave entrance. Lucy grabbed her rifle from beside her bag. "I can shoot, remember, better than most of your cowboys." A fleeting smile crossed Ben's face. "I remember." They positioned themselves on either side of the cave entrance, weapons ready. The rain had eased to a drizzle, allowing them to hear the approaching footsteps more clearly. Lucy counted at least 3 sets, possibly 4, spread out. A voice commanded not Emmett's but one of his hands, a man named Harker whom Lucy had always disliked. "They're here somewhere." Ben caught Lucy's eye and held up 3 fingers, then pointed to different positions outside the cave. Lucy nodded, understanding his silent communication. 3 men, spreading out to search. The footsteps came closer. Lucy could hear the men breathing now, could make out muttered curses as they navigated the wet, rocky slope. She tightened her grip on her rifle, her palms slick with sweat despite the cool air. A shadow fell across the cave entrance. Lucy held her breath as one of the men paused just outside, so close she could have reached out and touched his boot. "Hey," the man called suddenly. "I think I found something." The shadow moved away as the man stepped back from the cave entrance. Lucy exhaled shakily, relief flooding through her until she realized the man must have spotted their horses deeper in the cave. Ben seemed to realize it too. Without a word, he moved swiftly to the entrance and fired a warning shot into the air. "That's far enough," he shouted. "The next one won't miss." Chaos erupted outside. The men scattered, taking cover behind rocks and trees. A shot rang out, the bullet ricocheting off the cave wall with a shower of sparks. "Hayes," Harker's voice called. "We know you're in there. Come out with the girl and those papers, and maybe Blackwater won't hang you." "That's not much of an incentive, Harker," Ben called back. "Why don't you boys head back down the mountain and tell Blackwater we'll see him in Colville?" Another shot, closer this time. Lucy flinched as rock fragments stung her cheek. "They're trying to pin us down until Emmett arrives with the others," Ben said in a low voice. "We need to make a move while it's still just the 3 of them." Lucy nodded, her mind racing. "If we can reach the horses, maybe we can break through." "Too risky in this terrain, especially in the dark," Ben replied. "But if we can draw them away from the cave." He trailed off, thinking. Lucy remembered something from her childhood explorations with her father. "The back of the cave," she whispered urgently. "I was wrong. There is another way out, a narrow passage that leads higher up the ridge. I'd forgotten about it." Hope flared in Ben's eyes. "Are you sure?" "Reasonably sure," Lucy admitted. "It's been years, but I remember my father showing me." "It's worth a try," Ben decided. He fired another shot out the cave entrance, then called, "You boys might want to rethink this. I've got plenty of ammunition and a good position." While the men outside shouted back threats, Ben and Lucy moved quickly to the rear of the cave. In the dim light, Lucy ran her hands along the rough stone wall, searching for the gap she remembered. "Here," she said finally, her fingers finding a narrow fissure barely visible in the shadows. It widens after a few feet. Ben examined the opening dubiously. "You're sure this leads out?" "No," Lucy admitted, "but I'm sure I went through it as a child, and if I could fit then." "Then we can fit now," Ben finished for her. He turned back toward the cave entrance where the men outside had fallen ominously silent. "We need to move fast. You go first, I'll bring the horses." Lucy hesitated. "Ben, I don't think the horses will fit through there." The realization hit them both simultaneously. They would have to leave the horses behind. Without them, their journey to Colville would take days longer, and they would be exposed to the elements with limited supplies. "We'll find other horses," Ben said, making the decision. He reached into his saddlebag and retrieved the documents they had taken from Emmett's safe, tucking them securely inside his coat. Then he took a small bundle of supplies, food, matches, a canteen, and handed it to Lucy. "Go. I'll be right behind you." Lucy squeezed through the narrow opening, finding that it did indeed widen after a few feet, though the passage remained low enough that she had to crouch. Behind her, she heard Ben fire several more shots toward the cave entrance, presumably to keep their pursuers at bay while he followed her. The passage was pitch dark and smelled of damp earth and rock. Lucy moved carefully, feeling her way along the rough walls. The air grew colder and the passage narrower as it twisted upward, until Lucy began to fear they might become stuck. Just as claustrophobia threatened to overwhelm her, Lucy felt a breath of fresher air on her face. She pushed forward eagerly and found herself emerging onto a small ledge high on the ridge, overlooking the valley below. The rain had stopped, and the clouds were breaking apart to reveal a sky filled with stars. Ben emerged behind her a moment later, breathing hard from the confined space. "You did it," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "You found the way out." Lucy smiled, though she knew he probably couldn't see it in the darkness. "My father used to say I had a knack for finding escape routes, usually when he wanted me to stay put." Ben chuckled softly, then grew serious again. "We need to keep moving. They'll figure out what happened eventually, and they might know about this exit too." They made their way carefully along the ridge, staying high above the valley where Emmett and his men were likely searching. The going was slow and treacherous in the darkness, but Lucy found that Ben's hand was often there to steady her when she stumbled, his strength a constant reassurance at her side. By the time dawn lightened the eastern sky, they had put several miles between themselves and the cave. They paused at a small stream to drink and rest briefly. "How far to Colville from here?" Lucy asked, splashing cold water on her face to revive herself. "On foot, at least 3 days," Ben estimated. "Longer if the weather turns bad again." Lucy looked at the mountains looming ahead of them, their peaks shrouded in mist. The prospect was daunting, but when she thought of the alternative, returning to Blackwater Ranch, to Emmett's control, her resolve hardened. "Then we'd better keep moving," she said simply. Ben studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "We'll follow this ridge until we're well clear of Blackwater's likely search area. Then we can drop down to easier terrain." They continued their journey as the day brightened around them. Despite the danger, Lucy found herself appreciating the wild beauty of the landscape, the towering pines, the meadows dotted with late summer wildflowers, the occasional glimpse of deer moving gracefully through the undergrowth. By midday, they had descended from the ridge into a broad valley that Lucy didn't recognize from her hunting trips with her father. The walking was easier here, but they were more exposed. Ben kept them close to the tree line, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings for any sign of pursuit. "Do you think they're still following us?" Lucy asked as they paused to eat a meager lunch of jerky and dried fruit. "Blackwater won't give up easily," Ben replied. Not with what we have. He patted his coat where the documents were secured, but we've covered our tracks well. And they may still be searching the area around the cave. Lucy nodded, trying to take comfort in his assessment. What will happen when we reach Colville? Will the marshal really be able to help us? Marshal Donovan is a fair man, Ben said. I've met him before when I was driving cattle through this territory. He won't be intimidated by Blackwater's influence, and he takes fraud seriously. And after? Lucy asked, the question that had been lingering in her mind finally finding voice. What happens after this is resolved. Ben was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made Lucy's heart beat faster. That depends, he said finally, on what you want, Lucy. I want to be free, she said immediately. Free of Emmett Blackwater, free of debt, free to make my own choices. Ben nodded. And you will be, I promise you that. Lucy hesitated, then took a deep breath and continued. But I've been thinking about Oregon, about what you said. She met his gaze directly. It sounds like a place where a person or persons could start fresh, build something worthwhile. Understanding dawned in Ben's eyes, followed by a warmth that Lucy had come to treasure over these past days. It is, he agreed, his voice soft. And I find myself hoping that certain persons might consider building that future together. The directness of his words took Lucy's breath away. In her world, men and women danced around such matters with careful formality. But here they were, sitting on a fallen log in the wilderness, discussing a future together with a forthrightness that was both terrifying and exhilarating. I'd like that, Lucy whispered, surprised by her own boldness. Very much. Ben's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He reached for her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. Then we have one more reason to reach Colville safely. The moment was interrupted by a distant sound that made them both stiffen, the faint but unmistakable report of a rifle echoing across the valley. They've found our trail, Ben said grimly, rising to his feet. We need to move. They set off at a faster pace, angling deeper into the forest where the trees would provide better cover. Lucy's earlier fatigue was forgotten, replaced by a surge of determination. She had just glimpsed a future she desperately wanted, a future with Ben, free from Emmett Blackwater's shadow, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. They traveled until well after dark, pushing themselves to the limits of their endurance. When they finally stopped for the night, it was in a dense thicket that offered concealment from all sides. They dared not light a fire, instead huddling together for warmth as the temperature dropped. Try to sleep, Ben murmured, his arm around Lucy's shoulders. I'll keep watch for a while. Lucy wanted to protest, knowing he was as exhausted as she was, but her body betrayed her with a bone-deep weariness that made her eyelids heavy. She leaned against Ben's solid warmth, finding comfort in his steady presence. Ben, she said softly, fighting sleep for a moment longer. Thank you. For everything. She felt rather than saw his smile in the darkness. Sleep, Lucy. Tomorrow we'll be that much closer to Colville, that much closer to freedom. Lucy awoke to the gray light of dawn and the disorienting sensation of being watched. For a moment, she thought it was Ben, but when she turned her head, she found him still asleep beside her, his face relaxed and younger looking in repose. The sensation persisted. Lucy carefully extricated herself from Ben's embrace and sat up, scanning their surroundings with growing unease. The forest around them was still, the only sounds the early morning calls of birds and the whisper of wind through the pines. Then she saw a flash of movement between the trees, about 50 yards away. Lucy froze, straining her eyes to see more clearly in the dim light. It could be a deer or some other woodland creature. Or it could be one of Emmett's men. She reached for Ben, gently shaking his shoulder. He woke instantly, his hand moving to his gun before he was fully conscious. "Someone's out there," Lucy whispered, gesturing toward where she had seen the movement. Ben nodded, fully alert now. Without a word, he moved into a crouch, motioning for Lucy to stay low. They gathered their meager supplies quickly and silently, preparing to move. A twig snapped in the distance closer this time. Lucy felt her heart hammering against her ribs. They were being stalked, methodically and patiently. "We need to split up," Ben whispered, his mouth close to her ear. "I'll lead them away. You head northeast, keep the sun on your right shoulder. You'll hit the Colville Road by midday." "No," Lucy hissed back. "We stay together." Ben's eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. "Lucy, the papers are what matter. If they catch me, they still won't have the evidence. You can make it to Marshal Donovan. And what happens to you?" Lucy demanded, still keeping her voice barely above a whisper. "Emmett will kill you, Ben." "He'll try," Ben acknowledged grimly, "but I'm hard to kill." Before Lucy could argue further, another sound caught their attention, the unmistakable click of a rifle hammer being cocked. It came from behind them, not from the direction where Lucy had spotted movement. "Too late for that plan, Hayes," said Harker's voice. "Both of you stand up slow, hands where I can see them." Ben and Lucy exchanged a look of silent communication. Then Ben called out, "We're standing up, Harker." "Don't shoot." They rose slowly, hands raised. Lucy felt exposed and vulnerable, but she kept her chin up, refusing to show fear. Harker emerged from the trees, rifle aimed steadily at them. Behind him came two more of Emmett's men, similarly armed. And behind them, sitting easily on his horse, was Emmett Blackwater himself. "Well, well," Emmett said, his voice carrying across the clearing. "The runaway and her knight. You've led us on quite a chase." "It's over, Blackwater," Ben replied, his voice steady despite their dire situation. "We know what you did. The territorial marshal will too, once he sees the evidence." Emmett smiled coldly. "What evidence would that be, Hayes? The papers you stole from my office. Interesting how a man like you with your background would think anyone would believe documents you produced." Lucy glanced at Ben, confused by Emmett's words. "What did he mean by your background? Search them," Emmett ordered. Harker motioned with his rifle for one of the other men to approach. The man patted Ben down roughly, soon finding the papers tucked inside his coat. He handed them to Emmett, who examined them briefly before tucking them into his own jacket. "Now," Emmett said, his voice hardening, "we have a choice to make. Hayes, you're a thief and a troublemaker. By rights, I should hang you from the nearest tree." He paused, his gaze shifting to Lucy. "But I'm a reasonable man. So here's what's going to happen. Miss Collins is coming back with me. She's still under contract after all. You, Hayes, are going to ride away and never show your face in Republic again." "No," Lucy said before Ben could respond. "I won't go back with you." Emmett's expression darkened. "You don't have a choice, girl, unless you want to watch your friend die right here." Lucy felt a cold determination settle over her. "If you kill him, you'll have to kill me too, and then you'll have murdered two people over some papers that I've already memorized. Every figure, every calculation, every fraudulent entry." This was a bluff. Lucy hadn't studied the papers closely enough to memorize them, but her voice didn't waver as she continued. "I'll testify to what I've seen, Mr. Blackwater, to what you did to my father and what you tried to do to me." A tense silence fell over the clearing. Lucy could see the calculation in Emmett's eyes as he weighed his options. Kill them both. It would be risky. Two murders would be harder to explain away than keeping a servant to her contract. Let them go. Unthinkable for a man like Emmett Blackwater, who had built his empire on never showing weakness. Ben shifted slightly beside Lucy, and she knew he was preparing to make some desperate move. She wanted to stop him, to tell him it was too dangerous. But before she could, the quiet of the morning was shattered by the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Everyone in the clearing tensed, guns swinging toward the sound. Emmett barked an order for his men to spread out, clearly thinking these new arrivals might be threats. 6 riders burst into the clearing, and Lucy's heart sank as she recognized more of Emmett's ranch hands. But then she noticed something odd. The men weren't looking to Emmett for orders. Instead, they had formed a semicircle, their weapons trained not on Ben and Lucy, but on Emmett and his 3 companions. "What is the meaning of this?" Emmett demanded, his face flushing with anger. One of the newcomers, a grizzled cowboy named Jim whom Lucy knew from the ranch, spoke up. "We heard what happened, boss, about the girl's debt, about how you've been cooking the books. Who told you that?" Emmett snarled. Jim nodded toward Ben. "Hayes did, before he and Miss Collins left, showed us copies of those papers you're holding. We didn't believe him at first, but then we started talking among ourselves, comparing notes on our own pay, on cattle counts that never seemed to add up." Lucy looked at Ben in amazement. He had prepared for this possibility, had laid groundwork she knew nothing about. "This is ridiculous," Emmett blustered. "You're believing a drifter over me, after all I've done for you men." "What have you done for us, Mr. Blackwater?" another hand asked. "Paid us less than what we earned, cheated us on our share of the cattle sales." "Same as you did to Miss Collins and her pa." The balance of power in the clearing had shifted dramatically. Emmett seemed to realize it too, his hand inching toward the gun at his hip. "I wouldn't," Jim warned, his rifle steady. "We're not here to harm you, boss. But we are going to escort you to Colville where you can explain yourself to Marshal Donovan." Emmett's face contorted with rage. "You think you can dictate terms to me, on my own land?" "Not your land," Ben said quietly. "Not all of it, anyway. The Collins homestead was never legally transferred to you. The debt was fraudulent, which means your claim on the property is void." This seemed to be the final straw for Emmett. With a roar of fury, he drew his gun. Before he could fire, however, a shot rang out. Emmett cried out in pain as the gun flew from his hand, a bloody furrow across his knuckles where Jim's bullet had grazed him. "Next one won't be a warning," Jim said grimly. The fight went out of Emmett then. His shoulders slumped, and the arrogant mask he had worn for so long seemed to crack, revealing the petty, grasping man beneath. "Harker, Simmons, Peters, drop your weapons," Jim ordered Emmett's remaining loyal men. After a moment's hesitation, they complied. Lucy could scarcely believe what was happening. She turned to Ben, finding him already looking at her with a mixture of relief and triumph in his eyes. "You planned this," she said, not a question but a statement of wonder. "I hoped," Ben corrected. "I wasn't sure they would come." But Jim and the others, they're good men. They just needed to see the truth. One of the ranch hands dismounted and approached Ben and Lucy, leading a pair of horses. "Thought you might need these," he said, offering the reins to Ben. "Borrowed them from the south pasture string." "Thank you, Pete," Ben said, taking the reins. He helped Lucy mount, then swung up onto his own horse. Jim approached, handing the recovered documents to Ben. "We'll take Blackwater and his boys to Colville. You two go on ahead, get things ready with the marshal." Ben nodded his thanks. "We'll ride fast." As they prepared to leave, Lucy found herself looking back at Emmett Blackwater, the man who had dominated her life for the past 6 months, who had tried to own her through debt and intimidation. He sat on his horse, flanked by Jim and another hand, his face a mask of defeat and fury. "Lucy," Ben said softly, drawing her attention away from Emmett, "it's over. He can't hurt you anymore." Lucy felt a weight lift from her shoulders, a weight she had carried for so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to stand straight and free. She smiled at Ben, a real smile that came from deep within her heart. "Let's go," she said. We have a future to build. The journey to Colville took less than a day with the fresh horses. They arrived as the sun was setting, the small town's buildings bathed in golden light that seemed to Lucy like a promise of better days ahead. Marshal Donovan turned out to be exactly as Ben had described, a fair man who took his duties seriously. He listened to their story, examined the documents, and promised to investigate thoroughly. Blackwater won't get away with this, he assured them. Fraud, illegal debt servitude, threatening bodily harm, these are serious charges. When your witnesses arrive tomorrow, we'll take formal statements from everyone. They found lodging at the town's small hotel, Lucy in a room of her own for the first time in months. After a hot bath and a proper meal, she stood at the window of her room, watching the street below as the lamps were lit, and the day's activities wound down. A knock at her door roused her from her contemplation. She opened it to find Ben standing there, freshly bathed and shaved, wearing a clean shirt that made his blue eyes seem even more vivid. "I thought you might like to take a walk," he said. "The night's too fine to spend indoors." Lucy agreed readily. They strolled through Colville's quiet streets, eventually finding themselves in a small park with a view of the distant mountains, still faintly visible in the twilight. "What happens now?" Lucy asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "With Emmett, I mean." "He'll face charges," Ben replied. "With the evidence we have and the witnesses coming, he'll likely serve time. At the very least, he'll lose much of what he's built through fraud. And my father's homestead, it should revert to you as his heir. It might take some legal proceedings, but Marshal Donovan seemed confident." Lucy nodded, trying to absorb the reality of it all. After months of believing she would never escape Blackwater Ranch, she was not only free but potentially a landowner in her own right. "And what about you, Ben?" she asked, turning to face him directly. "What happens to you now?" Ben's eyes met hers, warm and steady in the gathering darkness. "That depends," he said, echoing his words from days earlier. "On what you want, Lucy." Lucy took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want what we talked about in the forest, Oregon, a new beginning, a place to build something worthwhile." She paused, then added softly, "With you." Ben's face broke into a smile that made Lucy's heart skip. He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I want that too. More than I can say." "It won't be easy," Lucy warned. "Starting over never is." "No," Ben agreed. "But we've faced worse together already, haven't we?" Lucy laughed softly, realizing the truth in his words. In just a few days, they had outrun pursuers, navigated wilderness, confronted a man who had seemed untouchable. Building a life together, whatever challenges it might bring, seemed entirely possible by comparison. "There's something I need to tell you first," Ben said, his expression growing more serious. "Something about my past that you should know before you decide." Lucy waited, her hand still in his. "Emmett mentioned my background in the clearing," Ben continued. "He wasn't just trying to discredit me. I was arrested once, years ago, for theft. I was young, desperate, and foolish. I served my time, but it's a part of my history that follows me." Lucy studied his face, finding nothing but honesty in his eyes. "Is that why you understood my situation so well? Why you were so determined to help me?" Ben nodded. "Partly. I know what it's like to make mistakes and pay for them over and over, to have your past define your future in other people's eyes." "And in Oregon?" Lucy asked. "Will this affect us there? My uncle knows my history." "He still wants me to take over his ranch." Ben hesitated. "But others might not be so understanding if they learn of it." Lucy considered this, then smiled. "Then we'll just have to prove ourselves through our actions, together." The relief on Ben's face was palpable. He drew her closer, one hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "Lucy Collins," he said softly, "you are the most remarkable woman I've ever met." And then he was kissing her, his lips warm and gentle against hers. Lucy responded without hesitation, her arms sliding around his neck as the kiss deepened. In that moment, all the fear and uncertainty of the past days, of the past months, melted away, replaced by a certainty that felt like coming home. When they finally broke apart, Lucy was breathless and laughing. "I never imagined," she said, "when I woke up at Blackwater Ranch a few days ago that my life could change so completely." "Sometimes," Ben replied, his arms still around her waist, "freedom comes in unexpected ways." 4 months later, Lucy stood on the porch of a modest but well-built house overlooking a green valley. Spring had come early to Oregon, bringing with it a profusion of wildflowers and tender new leaves on the trees. In the pastures below, cattle grazed peacefully, their reddish coats gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. The sound of hoofbeats drew her attention to the road, where a rider was approaching at an easy trot. Lucy smiled as she recognized Ben, returning from his meeting in town. He dismounted with the fluid grace that still made her heart skip, tying his horse to the hitching post before joining her on the porch. "How was the banking meeting?" Lucy asked after he had greeted her with a kiss. "Successful," Ben replied, his arms sliding around her waist. "The loan is approved. We can buy the additional acreage to the north." Lucy leaned against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "Your uncle will be pleased. The ranch is growing faster than he expected." "Our ranch," Ben corrected gently. "Uncle Frank signed the final transfer papers yesterday. It's officially ours now, Mrs. Hayes." The name still sent a thrill through Lucy, though they had been married for 3 months. The wedding had been small but joyful, held in Colville after Emmett Blackwater's trial had concluded with his conviction for fraud and illegal debt practices. Lucy had reclaimed her father's homestead, selling it to finance their fresh start in Oregon. "I had a letter from Jim today," Lucy said. "He says Republic is changing for the better. The new owner of Blackwater Ranch, Baker, I think his name is paying fair wages and running an honest operation." Ben nodded, pleased but not surprised. "Jim will make an excellent foreman. He always had the right instincts." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun begin its descent toward the distant mountains. Life wasn't perfect. There was always more work than hours in the day, always challenges to face and problems to solve. But they faced them together, with a partnership forged in adversity and strengthened by love. "I was thinking," Lucy said after a while, "about planting an orchard on the east slope. Apple trees would do well there, and maybe some cherries." Ben smiled, recognizing her restless energy, her constant drive to build and improve. It was one of the many things he loved about her. "Whatever you think best, love. You have good instincts for the land." Lucy turned in his arms, looking up at him with eyes that still held traces of the wariness she had learned at Blackwater Ranch, but now shone predominantly with happiness and purpose. "Are you happy, Ben? With this life we're making?" Ben's answer was in his kiss, tender and passionate all at once. When he finally drew back, he said simply, "Happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me more than freedom, Lucy. You gave me a future worth building." As the sun set over their land, their home, Lucy thought of how far they had come from that morning when a rifle shot had broken the dawn silence at Blackwater Ranch. The rancher had said she'd work until she dropped, but a cowboy had paid her debt and set her free. And in that freedom, they had found something neither had dared to hope for. A love as vast as the western sky and as enduring as the mountains that watched over their valley. Together, they walked into the house they had built with their own hands, closing the door on the past and embracing the future they had claimed for themselves, not through debt or obligation, but through courage, honesty, and the unbreakable bond between two hearts that had recognized in each other the home they had always been seeking.